Wisdom, work, and words. We're in chapter 10 in our series through Ecclesiastes, a series we're calling A Control Freak's Guide to Joy. Chapter 10 is more like the book of Proverbs that seem like random statements that aren't really connected, but I did find an outline from one of my commentaries that made a lot of sense, that I really liked, and so rather than come up with my own, I borrowed this outline. So we've been using this outline from David Hubbard and Lloyd Ogilvie, and it's in your bulletin if you want to look at it. It's under the notes section, but it's Ecclesiastes chapter 10, and this is their outline. Number 1, folly, corrupt and corrupting. That's verses 1 through 3. Number 2, power, used and abused. That's verses 4 through 7. 3, work, careless and cautious. That's verses 8 through 11. 4, words, gracious and calling, verses 12 through 15. And the 5th one, rulers, decadent and discipline, verses 16 through 20. We've covered the first 2 points, number 1 and 2, and I'm going to try, I wrote that in my notes. I said I was going to try to cover the last 3, but we're going to do the next 2 today. So let's just dive right in. Number 3, work, careless and cautious. Verses 8 through 11. Ecclesiastes 8 through 11 says this: He who digs a pit will fall into it, and a serpent will bite him who breaks through a wall. He who quarries stones is hurt by them, and he who splits logs is endangered by them. If the iron is blunt and one does not sharpen the edge, he must use more strength. But wisdom helps one to succeed. If the serpent bites before it is charmed, there is no advantage to the charmer. So he gives us 4 pictorial sayings that all have something to do with work. They all have something to do with work. And I think the main idea is that just like in everything else, as we've been seeing through the book of Ecclesiastes, just like in everything else, stuff happens in the realm of work also that is unknowable and uncontrollable. Even in your business, even in your work, things are uncontrollable, outside of your control, outside of what you can foresee. Work also is vapor. Work also is mist. Accidents happen. Everyone who works knows accidents happen, and accidents happen quite often. This is why employers have safety signs everywhere and rules and sometimes penalties for not following the safety rules. My son, Levi, forgot to ask if I could use this illustration, so I'm going to anyways. He just got a new job, construction job, and he found out really quick why they make you wear hard hats. Let's just say his new hard hat already has a new nick in it. So he was glad he was wearing it. Is that okay? We can erase that. Accidents happen. This is work. Work is just like all the rest of life. It's uncontrollable, unknowable. You don't know what's going to happen. You're not in total control. You never are. Hubbard and Ogilvie put it this way: the saying should be read more literally and seen as warnings of the hazards of the workaday world. Accidents do happen, and with enough regularity to cause governments, corporations, and labor unions to plaster the walls of the workplace with suggestions for safety and notices of penalties where the suggestions are not heeded. Work is wisdom's world, as well as home, palace, marketplace, and city gate. That's Hubbard and Ogilvie. Things happen at work that are often outside of our control, and that's kind of the point of our text. Just a couple days ago, I read in the news, it was this Friday, you might have heard about it in the news, a flash mob of 70 or more people for 40 minutes. A big mob went into this gas station and robbed it was in Oakland, a gas station, and stole like $100,000 worth of stuff. Just taking everything. And then they didn't even take everything, they just destroyed everything. And the owner of the gas station said, quote, "You put your blood and sweat into your business so you can feed your kids and make a living, and in a blink of an eye, everything is gone." He just got this gas station like a year before, and they just destroyed everything. They didn't take everything, they just destroyed everything. In other words, it's vapor. You can't always hold on to things. The unpredictability of life and the lack of wisdom in the world is also why you can find so many crazy examples of warning signs and labels on things, right? This is always kind of humorous. When you look at warning signs, warning labels on different things. So I looked up some, found a few examples. On an iron-on t-shirt transfer, you remember those? Where you can put a picture on your t-shirt when you just iron it on. The warning was, do not iron while wearing shirt. On a box of sleeping, these are real warning labels. On a box of sleeping pills, quote, may cause drowsiness. On a chainsaw, danger, do not hold the wrong end of a chainsaw. Now you tell me. On a jet ski, never use a lit match or open flame to check fuel level. On a hairdryer, do not use while sleeping. Can't tell you how many times. So folly can have its consequences. Ecclesiastes 10, verse 8, as we move on, it says, he who digs a pit will fall into it, and a serpent will bite him who breaks through a wall. He could basically just be saying that the world can be a dangerous place, so wisdom helps you be more careful. Wisdom helps you be more cautious. Here's an example of this view of this verse. He who digs a pit will fall into it, and a serpent will bite him who breaks through a wall. This is Trimper Longman III. He says this. Here, an innocent person is simply engaged in his occupation, and he is accidentally injured. This is the first of 4 illustrations of people who are simply doing their jobs and who fall prey to the dangers that are inherent in their occupations. Their injuries are simply accidental. They are not punishments for bad behavior, and they are not mentioned so that the wise person can avoid them. They are unavoidable accidents. So that's the one view of this verse. It happens. Accidents happen. Many scholars believe that this is not a prediction, but just a possibility, right? This could happen. It could be translated may instead of will, right? This may happen, not necessarily, this will always happen. He who digs a pit may fall into it, and a serpent may bite him who breaks through a wall. But there's others who have a different interpretation of this verse and think that it's not talking about mistakes or accidents. It's not talking about mistakes, but malice. And they use other scriptures to give other examples. As Koch puts it, quote, the evildoer will/should fall by the very evil that is perpetrated. Wrongdoing is essentially corruptive for the wrongdoer because it comes back upon him. You might hear this, many people call this karma. Christians might call it sowing and reaping. And some of the other scriptures that demonstrate this view are these. Psalm 7, 15 through 16. He makes a pit, digging it out, and falls into the hole that he has made. His mischief returns upon his own head, and on his own skull his violence descends. Then Proverbs 26, 27 says, this: whoever digs a pit will fall into it, and a stone will come back on him who starts it rolling. And Psalm 35, verse 7 and 8 says, for without cause they hid their net for me. Without cause they dug a pit for my life. Let destruction come upon him when he does not know it. And let the net that he hid ensnare him. Let him fall into it to his destruction. So whether it's a mistake or malice, foolishness can cause you to fall into the pit that you dug. It just might happen because you deserve it or because it's just an accident, a quote-unquote accident. Things happen. The pit that you dig, you might fall into it. Can't tell you how many times. The second half of verse 8 says, and a serpent will bite him who breaks through a wall. A serpent will bite him who breaks through a wall. Well, that explains what happened to the Kool-Aid man. Most of you younger people don't know what I'm talking about. There was these old commercials of Kool-Aid commercials where they said, hey, Kool-Aid, in this big red ball pitcher. Oh, it was a pitcher of Kool-Aid. Yeah, breaks through this wall. Well, he got bit. The Kool-Aid man also might be the real truth behind what happened to Humpty Dumpty. We don't know. If we're talking about malicious intent instead of just work errors or mistakes or accidents, that might also tell us what it means by, and a serpent will bite him who breaks through a wall. As Craig Bartholomew explains, he says, similarly, breaking through a wall should be taken in parallel as a further example of evil doing. In this case, breaking and entering in order to steal. A strong reading of the character consequence structure in Proverbs would expect evildoers to get their just deserts. Thus, the one who digs a pit will fall into it, and the one who breaks and enters will be bitten by a snake. The mortar used for building walls in Israel would be ready homes for snakes when it chipped away and left crevices. That's Bartholomew. Either way, foolishness will come back to bite you. It will come back to bite. Listen to verse 9 in our text. Ecclesiastes 10, verse 9. He who quarries stones is hurt by them, and he who splits logs is endangered by them. Working foolishly, whether it is when you quarry stones or split logs, can be hazardous to your health. I think we have a couple guys who do both in our own congregation. Quarry stones and split logs, or have done both. They know the danger involved, and they know the consequences of those kind of jobs. Wisdom prevents accidents involving the uncontrollable and unknowable consequences of occupational hazards. I think that's what it's clearly saying. Speaking of splitting wood and accidents happening, this is actually addressed. This specific example is actually addressed in the law of God. Deuteronomy chapter 19, starting in verse 4, says this. Deuteronomy 19, verse 4. This is the provision for the manslayer who by fleeing, and this is the context here, he's talking about the cities of refuge. So if you accidentally killed someone, you could flee quickly to the city of refuge until you could undergo a fair trial. So this is the provision for the manslayer who by fleeing there to the city of refuge may save his life. If anyone kills his neighbor unintentionally without having hated him in the past, as when someone goes into the forest with his neighbor to cut wood, and his hand swings the axe to cut down a tree, and the head slips from the handle and strikes his neighbor so that he dies, he may flee to one of these cities and live, lest the avenger of blood in hot anger pursue the manslayer and overtake him, because the way is long, and strike him fatally, though the man did not deserve to die. since he had not hated his neighbor in the past. So if you're out with your buddy in the woods and your axe comes off the handle, kills your buddy, you can flee to the city of refuge. Again, Craig Bartholomew says this. Coelet, speaking of the preacher Solomon, Coelet does not comment further on these examples, but we know him well enough by now to know that know what he is thinking. His epistemology is such that it just takes one unpredictable, uncontrollable accident to shatter traditional wisdom. Any such accident means that life is unpredictable, an enigma. Accidents happen, and they are often outside of our control, like all of life. It's a mist, it's a vapor. You can't grab it, you can't control it. God is sovereign, we're not. Anyone who has ever been in a serious car accident that was not their fault knows all too well that this is true. Things happen outside of your control. This is something control freaks do not like to think about. But still the same, God is sovereign and God is also good. And everything happens for our good and his glory. Now listen to what it says next in our text, Ecclesiastes 10, verse 10 and 11. If the iron is blunt and one does not sharpen the edge, he must use more strength. But wisdom helps one to succeed. If the serpent bites before it is charmed, there is no advantage to the charmer. So what do those two verses mean? How are they connected? Let's start with verse 10, which is a little more obvious. If the iron is blunt and one does not sharpen the edge, he must use more strength, and wisdom helps one to succeed. He just talked about splitting logs. He just talked about the danger of using an axe on trees in the previous verse. So now he makes another point on the same subject. If you have an axe that is dull, the wisest thing to do before you use the axe is to sharpen your axe. Amen? If you have a sword that isn't sharp, the wise thing to do is first sharpen the edge of the blade before you go to war, before you try to use the blade. It's foolish to just say, that's okay, I'll just try to use more force. I'll just use more of my own mere efforts. I'll just use more of my own strength. I don't need to sharpen it. I'll do it. I'll do it harder. I'll keep chopping away. Even though it's blunt, it's not sharp. A fool would say, I'll just keep hacking away and hope to keep doing the same thing and getting different results. The wise thing to do is sharpen the blade so that it can work with one single swing of the axe or swing of the sword. Cut the log in half or cut the person in half. Philip Ryken brings some helpful application to this point. This is good. In his commentary, he's good at bringing application. He says, if we are wise, therefore, we will take the time to prepare our blade. This principle applies to education. Be sure to get the best training, sharpening skills for effective service in the kingdom of God. It applies to relationships. A prudent courtship is far more likely to lead to a more successful marriage than a whirlwind romance. It applies to ministry. Before starting something new, planning a church, for example, make sure that you have everything you need to succeed. We're talking about wisdom. He continues, how sharp is your blade? Are you hacking away at life like a fool or staying on the sharp edge of wisdom? Living wisely may take more time at the beginning, but it saves time in the long run. Make sure you have the right tools for the job God has given you to do. and then take the time to prepare them well. That's Riken. That's good stuff. Verse 11 in our text says, if the serpent bites before it is charmed, there is no advantage to the charmer. This seems to be making the opposite point of the previous verse. Verse 10 was about taking your time and preparing your tools first so you can be more effective. Verse 11 seems to be about taking too much time and acting slowly. You can roll off the roof on one side or the other. If you take too long to get the charmer, you're going to get bit by the snake. Again, Riken adds these thoughts. Taken together, verses 11 and 10 show us why we need wisdom from God. Sometimes it is important to take more time to prepare. Other times we need to act before it's too late. Wisdom comes in knowing the difference. Ovid, the famous Roman poet, is reported to have said, at times it is folly to hasten, at other times to delay. The wise do everything in its proper time. Thus, the wise person is never early and never late, but always right on time. That's right. So that was the third point on our outline: work, careless, and cautious, verses 8 through 11. So the first one was folly, corrupt and corrupting, verses 1 through 3. Second point was power used and abused, verses 4 through 7. Third, what we just discussed, work, careless, and cautious, verses 8 through 11. So the fourth point on the outline is words, graceful and calling, verses 12 through 15. So Ecclesiastes 10, 12 through 15 says this: the words of a wise man's mouth win him favor, but the lips of a fool consume him. The beginning of the words of his mouth is foolishness, and the end of his talk is evil madness. A fool multiplies words, though no man knows what is to be, and who can tell him what will be after him. The toil of a fool wearies him, for he does not know the way to the city. So verse 12 carries on the thought of the snake charmer. In verse 11, the snake charmer is the fool. You could say the snake charmer is the fool who lacks wisdom and is not able to tame his tongue before he opens up his big yapper. The end result is that it will bring no advantage to him. Once again, remember what it said in verse 11. If the serpent bites before it's charmed, there is no advantage to the charmer. Psalm 140, verse 3 says, they make their tongue sharp as a serpent's, and under their lips is the venom of asps. And then verse 12 in our text, the words of a wise man's mouth win him favor, but the lips of a fool consume him. Anyone who's had kids knows that your young kids, at a very young age, go through this stage. It's the pick it up and put it in your mouth stage. They just grab anything they can find, and into the mouth it goes. Some of you have kids that are at this stage right now. Pick it up, pop it in. Doesn't matter how gross it is, how jagged it is, or how poisonous it is. Kids have been known to eat dog food or dog poop, bugs or boogers, cockroaches, or even worse, cauliflower. The good news is they will usually outgrow that stage, but the bad news is their mouth will cause them problems for the rest of their life. Walter Kaiser put it this way: wisdom is still the only proper guide to joyful involvement in life. Despite life's pitfalls and inexplicable twists, wisdom will temper, guard, and guide our actions. That is true wisdom found in the fear of God. And the instrument of this wisdom will be the tongue, or words of a wise man. His words are gracious in content, winsome in spirit, affectionate in appeal, and compliant and affable in tone. That's Kaiser. But on the other hand, as our text says, but the lips of a fool will consume him. I like that. I think that's a good word picture. The lips of a fool will consume him. It's like a cartoon video of someone's lips opening up real wide, backwards, and swallowing himself. That's at least how I interpret that verse. Going back to what we were talking about earlier, your foolish lips can dig a pit that you will fall into. His own words will swallow him up. And going back to the Pogo quote I recently used a couple sermons ago, we have met the enemy, and he is us. The lips of a fool will consume him. The words of a wise man's mouth are gracious in the sense that it wins him favor, but the lips of a fool will consume himself. Proverbs 10:19 says, when words are many, transgression is not lacking, but whoever restrains his lips is prudent. When words are many, when you're transgression is sure to follow, right? Just keep on talking. Keep on talking. Transgression is coming. But whoever restrains his lip is prudent, is wise. Proverbs 29:11. The fool gives full vent to his spirit, but a wise man quietly holds back. He has self-control. The fool is going to vent it all. He's just going to tell you everything he thinks. But a wise man quietly holds back. A fool loves to vent his feelings, but feelings, as you know, feelings don't have an IQ. Your fallen feelings can blindfold you to the facts. Feelings do not come from wisdom. Following your feelings, following your heart leads to foolishness and destruction. It leads to bad decisions and disasters. Back to our text, Ecclesiastes 10:13 says, the beginning of the words of his mouth is foolishness, and the end of his talk is evil madness. Whenever we're talking about words and multiple, using many words and the mouth and how dangerous it is just to speak, we can't talk about that subject without going to James. So I got to at least read James chapter 3, starting in verse 1. He says, not many of you should become teachers, my brothers, for you know that we who teach will be judged with greater strictness. For we all stumble in many ways. And if anyone does not stumble in what he says, he's a perfect man, able also to bridle his whole body. Do you hear that? For we all stumble in many ways. If anyone does not stumble in what he says, if you don't stumble, if you don't sin, if you don't say the wrong things, man, you're perfect. You're a perfect man, able also to bridle the whole body. If we put bits into the mouths of horses so that they obey us, we guide their whole bodies as well. Control the horse's mouth, you control the horse. Look at the ships also. Though they are so large and are driven by strong winds, they are guided by a very small rudder wherever the will of the pilot directs. So also the tongue is a small member, yet it boasts of great things. How great a forest is set ablaze by such a small fire. And the tongue is a fire, a world of unrighteousness. The tongue is set among our members, staining the whole body, setting on fire the entire course of life, and set on fire by hell. For every kind of beast and bird, of reptile and sea creature can be tamed and has been tamed by mankind. But no human being can tame the tongue. It's a restless evil, full of deadly poison. No human being can tame the tongue. That means it takes a supernatural act of God. It takes the Holy Spirit for that to actually happen. No human being, no human effort can tame the tongue. It's a restless evil full of deadly poison. We don't think much about things that are said. We say things all the time. We talk, we gossip. We talk bad things about others, sometimes just to make ourselves feel better. It's a restless evil full of deadly poison. Speaking of the tongue, speaking of the mouth, speaking of speaking, with it, verse 9, with it we bless our Lord and Father, and with it we curse people who are made in the likeness of God. From the same mouth come blessing and cursing. My brothers, these things ought not to be so. Does a spring pour forth from the same opening both fresh and salt water? Can a fig tree, my brothers, bear olives, or a grapevine produce figs? Neither can a salt pond yield fresh water. The tongue is a powerful and dangerous thing. That's why we need to guard our words, guard our lips. That's why James says what he says in chapter 1. He says, know this, my beloved brothers, let every person be quick to hear, slow to speak, and slow to anger. Philip Ryken also gives us several examples of wise ways to speak. So he has this list of different ways that are wise and ways to speak that are wise ways to speak. He says, a wise person offers verbal praise and audible thanksgiving to God, not cursing him, but blessing him. This is wise because it reminds us who we are. We are creatures made in the image of God and designed to give him the glory. If the fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge, as it says in Proverbs 1:7, then one of the first ways to show wisdom is by speaking or singing words of worship. Next point. When a wise person speaks to other people, he or she uses more words of encouragement than criticism. Usually the way to bring out the best in other people is not by finding fault, but by building them up. Instead of boasting, the wise person uses words to make other people look good. Next point. A wise person speaks the truth with his neighbor, Ephesians 4:25. Not stretching it for personal advantage, but saying what needs to be said in a loving way. This includes speaking out against injustice and confronting someone who is doing the wrong thing if it's our God-given place to do so. The wise person uses wise words to speak hard truths when they need to be spoken, what the Bible calls a word in season. Next point. A wise person speaks with gentleness, never in unrighteous anger. Wisdom waits. Wisdom waits until emotions are under better control. Then whatever words we speak can offer genuine grace. According to Proverbs 15:28, the heart of the righteous ponders how to answer, but the mouth of the wicked pours out evil things. The heart of the righteous ponders how to answer. Think before you speak. Next point he gives, Ryken. A wise person also knows how to use reconciling words like, I'm sorry and please forgive me. Although there are times when we are called to speak in our own defense, a wise person is never defensive, but instead is content to give a quiet answer and then let God bring vindication in his good time. Nor does a wise person lash out with cruel or cutting remarks, even when provoked, knowing that it is the soft answer that turns away wrath. Proverbs 15:1. And his final point on wise ways to speak. A wise person speaks words of love and affection. For example, a wise husband is not content to let his actions speak for themselves, but makes his wife secure by affirming his love. Sometimes wisdom is as simple as saying, I love you. That's Philip Ryken. Wise ways to speak. Again, our text, Ecclesiastes 10, 12 through 15. The words of a wise man's mouth win him favor, but the lips of a fool consume him. The beginning of the words of his mouth is foolishness, and the end of his talk is evil madness. A fool multiplies words, though no man knows what is to be, and who can tell him what will be after him? The toil of a fool wearies him, for he does not know the way to the city. Isn't that interesting? He doesn't know the way to the city. Even way back in the Bible times, men would not ask for directions. Douglas Sean O'Donnell says this: when the fool misses the obvious exit ramp to the big city, he journeys on, wearing himself and certainly others out with his chatting on about nothing. When he starts to speak, he does not know where he's going. His mouth is foolishness. When he finally stops, he's made it nowhere. His talk is evil madness. And in between starting and stopping, he jabbers on, multiplies words about future events of which he cannot possibly know the outcome. That's Douglas O'Donnell. This goes back again to the whole theme of Ecclesiastes. We're not in control. Solomon is painting a picture of a fool who cannot shut his mouth, a fool who cannot shut his mouth even though he really doesn't know what is to be or what will happen after him. Life is a vapor. Life is unknowable, uncontrollable. It's a mist. And I want to just close by reading the rest of chapter 10, verses 16 through 20. Woe to you, O land, when your king is a child. Woe to you, O land, when your king is a child, and your princes feast in the morning. Happy are you, O land, when your king is the son of the nobility, and your princes feast at the proper time, for strength and not for drunkenness. Through sloth the roof sinks in, and through indolence the house leaks. Bread is made for laughter, and wine gladdens life, and money answers everything. Even in your thoughts, do not curse the king, nor in your bedroom curse the rich, for a bird of the air will carry your voice, or some winged creature tell the matter. So the outline: folly, corrupt and corrupting; power, used and abused; work, careless and cautious; words, graceful and calling; and rulers, decadent and disciplined. Now to the King, eternal, immortal, invisible, to God, who alone is wise, be honor and glory forever and ever. Amen.